Good morning. Our reading today is Genesis 42, 1 through 29, and we see Joseph is vindicated. That's our title. So, Joseph's brothers who sold him off into slavery now find themselves in a place where they have to go to Joseph, who's the prime minister, if you will, of Egypt, and ask him for food. So, they're in the land of Canaan, and they go to Joseph and are asking the Egyptians, who were wealthy, for food resources. So picture it, perhaps maybe something like our border crisis, where those who are impoverished and poor are coming here and asking our government for something. Obviously, there's a lot more politics and things of that nature involved, but the point being is you have a wealthy resource and an impoverished country and people that need the higher and wealthier country and power, the one with more resources, probably knowing Egypt would have vats of barns stored with, grain and all types of resources and food and money. So they come and they ask Joseph, that they don't know is Joseph, their brother they sold. They assume he's dead, and as much time has gone by, and his appearance probably looks Egyptian now, and they bow down to him and beg him to give them food. And he says, "You guys are spies," and they're like, "No, we're not spies." And he says, "Okay, well, send your younger brother to prove what you're saying is true." Because they tell him the story about how they're all son of one man, and there's the younger brother at home, and one has died, which is Joseph. But this was all to reveal God's plan, ultimately. So he doesn't really believe they're spies. He just is doing this because ultimately we'll see he wants to see his family. But the point there is that the brothers, as they're talking, I believe it's Reuben who points out, "Look, I told you we should have never sold him into slavery." And they're kind of like, "Wow, you're right. We messed up." Well, that's the kind of sense you get here, that they realized that what they did to Joseph is coming back on them. I'll read it here for you in verse 22. Reuben answered them, saying, "Didn't I tell you, saying, 'Don't sin against the child'? And you wouldn't listen. Therefore also, behold, his blood is required." They didn't know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. So that's interesting. Joseph had forgotten the language. So he must have been very young when he was sold off into slavery. And also, perhaps there are different dialects. Maybe they're not speaking Hebrew. Maybe they're speaking the Canaanite dialect. I'm not sure on that one. But that was an interesting thing, that he needed an interpreter to interpret his brothers. Interesting. So he turned himself away from them and wept and returned and gave them all their money back. And they were kind of shocked and wondering, what's going on? What is God doing this? What is he doing to us, right? It says their hearts failed them, and they turned trembling to one another, saying, "What is this that God has done to us?" So they're scared that God is getting them back for what they did to Joseph, okay? And in a certain way, he is, right? But not in the way they think, that they're afraid they're going to die, that Joseph is going to accuse them of being spies and they'll be executed. But really, this is all part of God's plan. And so our question is, first one, how are the visions and promises given by God to Joseph as a boy fulfilled? So he had a vision that the sun and moon and stars are going to bow before him, and that was, his brothers said, "So you think you were going to, bow down and worship you?" So they interpreted that dream to mean them. And they did. They came and begged the Egyptians, which ended up being Joseph, who's the person in charge, the second in command under Pharaoh in all of Egypt. And so this dream here is fulfilled. What does this passage teach us about the result of sin? That we reap what we sow. So sometimes we miss the reactions to our sin. So we don't understand why things are happening. They did. They misunderstood what God was doing, like he's just going to kill us now and pay us back. And that's not what was happening. But they did understand that this was something was going on here in which they were guilty, and ultimately they were reaping what they were sowing. So third, what does this passage tell you about the phrase, you reap what you sow? Well, I think it teaches us that it is absolutely true. We talked about this in a previous podcast, if you missed it, or previous podcast episode, whatever you want to call it, that, some people use the phrase karma, but it's not, there's no impersonal force or personal force, or whatever you want to call it, called karma. It's simply a biblical principle that we reap what we sow. When we do good, there's blessings of God. When we do bad, the cursings of God, and that's in a spiritual covenantal sense, but even in a natural, real way. When we give to others, people are naturally going to appreciate it and want to give back to us. When we are greedy and stingy and don't give, then people are probably not going to want to give to us. And these are just biblical principles. And I think those things reap physically. I think they reap emotionally and spiritually in every way. And so I think that's what we could really take today, is that sometimes it won't happen right away. It won't be something we reap right away. But when we sow, things will come back to good or for bad. So let us do good, that we may reap a blessing.